What's up, everyone? You have tuned into Pop Smoke, where real veterans speak on real issues. From combat zones to the home front, we break down current events, military culture, and life after service. This is a veteran-made, unfiltered, and unapologetically bold podcast. Lock it in, we're just getting started. Hold the pen and pop smoke. What's up, guys, and welcome to a very special interview edition of Pop Smoke. Something that we want to do on a regular basis is highlight veterans and their endeavors, but also just to amplify those voices within the veteran community. Recently, I was able to sit down with published author and Navy veteran Brian Ricketts. We talk a little bit about his new book, Blood, Tears, and Purple Hearts. We talk about the nature of warfare and its history, and also how the battlefield is changing. But before we get into that, I wanted to take a second to quickly say thank you to everyone who's shown support for Pop Smoke and our project so far. As always, the veteran community comes together as a whole, and we really want to amplify those veteran voices. So, if you haven't already, like and subscribe on YouTube and Spotify at Pop Smoke Pod. Let us know what issues are going on within the veteran community, or if you're a veteran and want to come on and chat about a project or just shoot the shit with us, email us. Let us know. We'd love to talk. All right. So now, without further ado, let's get into the interview now with Brian Ricketts, published author and Navy veteran. And with us today, we have a very special guest, somebody that I have been talking to off and on for the past couple months, that I've been really trying to line up to chat with about his new project. And that's really because I feel like his objectives and his goals for this book and moving forward are very closely aligned with what we are trying to do as well. He is a Navy veteran, a private contractor, and now a published author. With us today, I have Mr. Brian Ricketts. Brian, how are you today?
Well, I'm great, Brett. How are you?
I am doing fantastic. Before we hopped on, we were just chatting a little bit about the weather because you're down in Texas, and I know it can get very, very hot down there. You said it's not been as hot recently, but staying cool, I hope, throughout this summer.
Well, I hope to. Like I told you, it's fairly pleasant today. It's not ridiculously hot. I don't think one would want to spend a whole lot of time out in the sun.
For sure. I've spent a limited amount of time down there, but you and I had talked about previously, Texas is not where you're from originally. Is that correct?
That's true. Actually, I was born in Illinois, but I grew up in Michigan. And when I was about 22, I went in the service and lived in Southern California for about 8 years. And from there, I came to Texas. I've been here ever since.
Okay. So, as we said, you are a Navy veteran. Did you do your training initially at Great Lakes up there in Illinois?
Yeah, that's where I went through basic. Of course, the nickname for it is Great Mistakes. You can guess what that's about.
So you did do 7 years, and tell us a little bit, was there any reason that you chose the Navy specifically in joining the military?
Well, actually, I started out to try and get into the Air Force, but for some reason, I felt like I wasn't Air Force material. So I went next door to the Navy, and they hopped right on it, and things took off from there.
Okay, it's interesting how that works, because I think when I first went into the delayed entry program, kind of a different time period from you, but I was all post 9/11, but I had initially taken my ASVAB with the Air Force. I had scored fairly well, and they said, hey, you can, the only obstacle that I had was I'm colorblind, blue-green colorblind, so there were certain MOSs in the Air Force that they wouldn't allow for me to do, but they said, you can do these types of jobs. They gave me a list, but in the back of my mind, I always knew that I wanted to be in a different branch other than the Air Force. So a couple weeks later, the Air Force recruiter called me, and he said, where are we at? Are you still ready to go? And I told him that I was going into the Marine Corps, and no lie, he told me to, I think almost verbatim, he said, call me in 2 years when you hate your life. And 2 years after that, I wanted to call him up and tell him, hey, you were probably right. No, it's interesting how that happens. And again, I think with all veterans, it's extremely interesting to find out kind of what led you down that path, because I think with any branch of service, the people that do go into the military, I think almost all of them, even if you take the benefits and everything that you get from that, I think there's a call to service there. So it's always interesting to see exactly why people maybe ended up in the military. And you were in the post Vietnam era, correct?
Yeah, I was in from 1977 through the end of 83 into 84.
Okay. So you did about 7, 8 years.
Yeah, it was just shy of 7 years of active duty. I think it was 6 years and 8 months or 9 months or something like that. The only reason it's kind of an odd number of months and years there is because I did a uh, extension of my initial contract so I could go to college on shore duty in San Diego. The only way I could do that was, give them 3 more. They paid for it, so that's really the real motivation for that. That was an interesting time, though, for me. Those were good years when I was on shore duty in San Diego. I was stationed out of Miramar.
Absolutely. I did a little bit of time at Delmar when I went to my school's battalion. But when you say it was a good time, just being out there in California, being young, going to school, or just interesting time in general?
I'd say probably a combination of all of those, including the fact that working on Miramar got me involved with fighter jets. I worked on maintenance for Tomcats and F4s and an assortment of other aircraft that they used at the time. They still used F8 Crusaders for reconnaissance missions. And of course, the usual stuff there. They had E2 uh, electronic warfare aircraft there too. There's a whole lot of transient units there too. F5s. Admiral flew his own private F5. Whenever he got called off to Washington or something, he hopped in and took off. Kept his flight hours up.
Oh, so you after that, you went to school there in San Diego, and I know eventually that led to you doing a little bit of private contracting as well, which I want to touch on a little bit more in depth here shortly, because I do think that with the book that you've written, I think that that might have weighed more heavily on you and influenced you more in writing this book than maybe your military service specifically. But tell us a little bit about that. I know it was post 9/11 that you were doing a little bit of contracting. Where were you exactly?
I can give you the story on that as it fell out. After 9/11, at that point in time, I was, I guess, 46 years old. And I thought, okay, I got 7 years of active duty. That should give me constructive time. I went and volunteered to go with the reserves on active reserves. And this sweet little thing answered the phone when I called about it, and I told her what I wanted to do and how old I was, and my qualifications. And I hear this kind of pause, and then she says, "Sir, you're too old." So I had to give up on that idea. So I went and did some volunteer work with the Coast Guard post 9/11, doing security patrols up and down the Gulf Coast here in the civilian aircraft. We flew patrols around all the oil refineries here to look for suspicious activity, which was silly. Nobody ever did it. We had a good time flying around. And I did that for a few years. So then I got in a situation where I needed to find alternative employment, and this opportunity came up to go work in the Middle East during OIF. I was basically out of Kuwait, but we did all the staging and support for everything going into Iraq at the time. Basically, the guys I was with there, we did all the management work for all the defects in theater, and that's kind of the extent of I heard a lot of stories from the truck drivers going up and down Highway 1 there between Baghdad and Kuwait City. And of course, I lived the desert life, so I kind of knew what the situation was. And I saw how they operated. When I say they, I'm talking about the U.S. military and the foreigners that were there, and what a horrible waste of money it was getting to be. I finally had to tell the guy that I worked for there that I was going to demob and go home. I said, "Well, what do you want to do that for?" I said, "Well, I worked as a employee of a defense contractor before I had that job after I got out of the Navy. Basically, what we do here, in my view, is a defraud of the U.S. government. I'm not going to go to jail for this. Contractor fraud is a felony in the United States. Of course, most of these guys are foreigners. They didn't give a hoot. They didn't have to come back and live in the United States. So he just let me go. Said, okay, have a nice life. And that was after I'd done it for, I don't know, 6, 7 months, which in retrospect, I probably should have kept going because I could have retired fat, happy, and rich, but I just didn't think it was proper.
Well, I know a lot of those guys that you worked for back then have probably definitely retired fat, happy, and rich. So you can either go the ethical way or the fat, happy, and rich way. But I agree with you completely that there was so much. I don't want to say fraud necessarily, but there was a lot of things going on, especially with private contracting, that there was some shady things going on. And I had just missed the OIF portion, went into the Marine Corps in 2008. So, especially with my MOS, we weren't using the amphibious assault vehicles in Iraq anymore. We were mainly starting to focus on OEF, but I saw the private contracting there as well. And I do think it was probably a little bit different from OIF to OEF, but I think the theme was the same. A lot of those guys were getting paid a ton of money, and they were collecting those paychecks, and whether they were having any benefit or not, they were happy as can be doing what they did. And that's not me bashing on the system as a whole, but I do think that there was a lot of that going on.
Yeah, they would be happy because basically they'd be doing nothing. We had people there that we didn't have a thing to do for weeks on end. That was typically like the military is, you hurry up and wait.
Absolutely. So you eventually just recently have authored this book. It has just recently been published. Tell us a little bit about the book itself.
Well, the book itself, from my perspective as the writer of it anyway, it's a study on how life is for a combat veteran who's been wounded, disabled, and has some serious PTSD issues to deal with.
And so the title itself is Blood, Tears, and Purple Hearts, correct?
That's correct, yes. I went and did a little bit of research on the title. It was recommended me to do that, and I ended up having 2 or 3 or 4 pages full of books with the same name. So I really had to expand on that. And the title of it, as it is, book Blood, Tears, and Purple Hearts, is kind of a description of the story. Being wounded in combat is blood. Dealing with everything after it is tears. And Purple Hearts, well, that's what you get. Now, is it worth what it is painted to be, or is it just a medal that proves you survived? And that's kind of the gist of the story. But really, it's about 2 women pilots they're friendly with each other, but in the course of the story of the book, they get more closer to each other.
The story itself takes place in Syria, which again, I think I could be wrong, but I think some of your time in the private contracting world could have definitely influenced that. Now, the story itself is nonfiction, correct?
Well, the story itself is total fiction, but it is based on an actual real forward operating base the United States used in Syria. It's still there, in fact, even after this turnover of the country to the well, basically it's ISIS. I don't care what they want to call themselves. But the name of the base is Al Tanf. It's right on the border of Syria and Baghdad, Iraq. And the history of this place is that it went through a number of different hands changing that were in control of it. The rebels had it for a while, then the Syrian government had it, then ISIS had it, then we came in and took it over. They came back and continually tried to take it back. And the battle in the book is based on actual battles that happened at that fort. This time frame is 2016, thereabouts, right during the peak of that time that we blundered into there and tried to say that we were helping.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the interesting pieces of this your story is that if you look at the traditional war novels or movies or anything that has come out within the last 20 years, it has been heavily revolved around Iraq and Afghanistan. Obviously, in some way, shape, or form, as you said, Syria has housed a lot of terrorist organizations, and same with some of the other countries that obviously are in the news right now heavily, whether it be ISIS or any number of those groups. But you don't see as much about Syria. I think you had told me that the story for this actually came from a friend of yours, correct?
Well, yeah, he gave me the concept for it to base it on women veterans. This fellow's a retired VA administrator who actually also was a Marine veteran that I served with on the assault ship that I was stationed on. He was one of the embarked air units. I think he was in HMM 262 or no, it was 265. This squadron was based in Kaneohe in Hawaii. Typically, when a Navy ship deploys to Western Pacific, at least the amphibs like I was on, the Marine units are either at Camp Pendleton or at Kaneohe in Hawaii. The medium lift big helicopters are always in Hawaii. The attack helicopters are always in California at Camp Pendleton. And so I got to know him through that. And we were talking one time about it. I told him about my plan to write this book, and he suggested that I might want to base it on women veterans with PTSD because they have a whole different range of symptoms. You know, they still have the classic ones, but they have a lot of physical problems, and it's a lot harder for them, I guess is what I'm trying to say. He suggested that since nobody's really been focusing on this, it might be a good subject for a book. So I thought about that. I said, yeah, that's probably a good idea. Let's give that a whirl and see where it goes. And well, it morphed into the book as it stands right now from that conversation.
So the book itself, the idea kind of hits home to me, and it's something that I never even contemplated before recently because we're a combat unit, and at the time that I was in, females were not being introduced into combat MOSs. Now, your book in particular deals with pilots, and obviously when I say combat units, I mean ground combat units. So we never had a whole lot of interaction with other female Marines. It was completely alien to us, the concept. But after we got out, they obviously started introducing female into ground combat units. So it is something that has been in the news more and more prevalently, especially over the past couple months with some of the changes that they've made to the requirements. But even more so than that, as I said, the concept is somewhat alien to me now. So as a father myself, I have 3 daughters. So I am 100% a girl dad, and fortunately, my daughters are all young, but they ask me a lot about my time in the Marine Corps. I mean, they know that daddy was a Marine. They know that I went to Afghanistan, and they have asked me certain things about being in the military and for them. And so the question for me has arisen is, would I want them to go into the Marine Corps? I think that obviously has a lot to do with the climate of when they get old enough to do that. So fortunately, we don't have to make that decision now. But it brings up the interesting point, as you said, of females in combat. I want my daughters to go through the possibility of certain scenarios, but obviously the PTSD, the trauma that females experience, not even just on the battlefield. And that's a whole different topic that you could get more in depth on because they do have trauma outside of the battlefield as well. But it's an interesting take that I don't think we've seen a lot of within the entertainment space or the movies or the novels recently. Is there anything specifically in relation maybe to female soldiers, sailors, Marines?
I don't have any personal relationships with them, but I can give you a good example of one. And she's also an ex-Marine herself. Her name's Kirsty Innes, Innes. And she was a door gunner in H-60 who basically had the same experience as these two fictional characters. She went down in a crash, I believe it was in Iraq, and she lost a leg. And well, rather than, wallow in it, she created this foundation for disabled women veterans. She's a go-getter. She's tough, but she's gone through it. Now, one of the things I wanted to mention to you about this, as far as the characters, what I tried to point out in this is they don't have to be a combat MOS. They could just be a support person, or in this case, helicopter pilots who happen to get shot down over a combat zone. That's not, strictly speaking, a combat role as a pilot, at least especially not a helicopter pilot, but it's clearly possible. And so, my take, I'm an old guy, I'm traditional. I don't think we should have the mothers of future generations taking risks like that. But that's me, There are a lot of people will not agree with me on that. I'm like you, I'm a girl dad. I got a daughter that's just in her early 40s now, and I don't know what I would have ever done if something would have happened to her. I would have lost my, what. But that's me, Not everybody's like that.
Obviously, that has been in the news more and more recently, and especially over the past 20 years. But I think you're absolutely right that the fact that you can be a male in supply, a female in supply, or logistics, or whatever, and you can still experience trauma within the military. So I think that that's a great point, is that it's not just grunts or infantry or whoever that experiences these types of symptoms or these types of PTSD or trauma. It can be anybody.
Well, as you know, there's a lot of situations where you can pick it up anyway, and they don't have to be combat. Anything can happen. Military training and services, well, it's not pleasant. At least I didn't.
Absolutely. And that's kind of what I was alluding to, is that, especially for females, you don't have to be deployed necessarily to experience trauma. But I think one of the themes also of this book is somewhat kind of overcoming obstacles, right? And so these pilots, one of them loses a leg, and again, I don't want to give too much away about the book itself, but I think part of her journey is kind of trying to get back into to flying, overcoming obstacles, and maybe having to deal with the after effects of those actions. Is there anything that you would like to be maybe addressed from this book in overcoming obstacles or dealing with the trauma of PTSD?
Well, one of the closing comments I have in the book is that this is a message to veterans. Don't give in to this. You have to do what all of us always had to do when we were in the military and still have to do in our life, and that's adapt to the situation, be improvise and overcome. I mean that's one of your Marine Corps sayings, I know, but it's true in life in general, not just in the military. We just have to adapt and learn to deal with whatever life throws at us, period. And that's really kind of the central theme of it. Now, she doesn't get to go back and do what she wants to do, but she understands ultimately in the end that life goes on and she's got a new path in front of her. Relationships are more important than your career.
I think that that resonates very close to what it is that we are trying to do within our organization. And I say that because I've seen firsthand so candidly that no matter how long you serve for in the military, whether it be 4 years, 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 20 years, that for that time period, especially for the global war on terror veterans, or any veterans for that matter, that it becomes a defining part of your life. And for so long, a lot of what you do is defined by that time in service, or it is a central theme in who you identify as. So, getting out of the military is often very confusing for a lot of people. I know it was for myself, and I know it was for a lot of the people that I served with. Obviously, there is an issue with suicide with amongst veterans, and I think that that plays a big part in it. Like you said, you don't have to be a combat role to have those feelings or not be able to identify what your next step is, what your purpose is. So a big part of what we're trying to do is help kind of guide veterans and help them find that defining purpose or what the next step is, what's going to define them, whether it just be, a career, a job, fatherhood, but doing it the best that you possibly can. So that's why I think that your message and what we're trying to do is so closely aligned. And I think that part of this book as well is a little bit about, as you said, whether you call them blunders or whether you say some of the conflicts that we've got ourselves into. But I do think that maybe there is a little bit of maybe not criticism in there of those things, but maybe a little bit of retrospective analysis.
Yeah, I do go into that a little bit in the opening to the book and the introduction. I don't try to say in this thing that this is good or bad. It's just the way it is. Whether we choose to subject ourselves to it or not, that's solely up to us. But if we do, you really have to understand what that means. You literally are risking your life. Plus, you may have to kill somebody that you really feel wrongly about having to do it. And that's just the reality of it. You might have to kill women or children. Can you live with that? Or I should say, can you recover from having to live with? And that's kind of
Right.
part of my thought process for it anyway. I never thought about that a lot when I was younger and doing all this stuff, but I'm old now, so I got a lot of time to think about it. And so I really wanted to do
Right.
this not only for myself, but for younger people, especially those in the 30 to 45 or 50 age range, because all of you have bled a lot more than any other generation since the Vietnam era. And I don't think you get enough credit for it. Let's put it that way. So I really wanted to do this for you guys and try to help it as much as I could. I don't know if I'm going to do that, but that's my contribution to the effort.
Well, I'm extremely excited to see what progresses further, but I think part of that, as you're saying, is whether it be, from the Vietnam era to the global war on terrorism era, the battlefield has changed immensely. And I think that as we've seen moving forward, I think the next time there's a major conflict, the battlefield is going to continue to change, whether it be drone warfare, whether it be any different aspects of how that could proceed in the future. It's interesting looking at the conflicts in that regard. So writing this book, you said that you would like to draw attention to certain sacrifices that have been made for the global war on terrorism generation. But if there's any one thing specifically that you would like to see come from this book, or let's say you were speaking to a VA administrator or a lawmaker, what would you want them to take from this book?
Well, I'd want them to realize that what they're doing right now is woefully inadequate for veterans. I have a new term I want to throw out for this. It's for them, basically. If you send them, you have to mend them. And that's basically the gist of it. If they send people there and screw them up like this, they really need to do as much as they can to put them back together. I don't feel like they're doing that at this point. God knows they didn't do it for my generation. In our time, it was just, well, buck up, deal with it. Well, that doesn't always work. And there's a lot of the people that are having the worst problems now, it's because of drugs and alcohol. But even that can be overcome if there's really a will to do so. That's the real question.
Without a doubt. And I agree with you wholeheartedly that there are obvious issues within the VA or with lawmakers that are attempting to pursue some of these challenges that we are facing within those systems. There's a lot of bureaucratic red tape that goes along with those things. And it can be a little bit disgusting how slowly some of those changes take place, but I do hope that things like this will continue to bring light and to encourage change. With anybody else, I am very appreciative of the systems that the VA currently has in place, but I would like to see them maybe be addressed in a way that could help veterans in a greater way. because I do think that, as you said, whether it be waiting 6 months to get an appointment or with just the system being broken in general, I think that change does need to be made. One thing that you had said in the book that I thought was kind of poignant as well is you had said all wars in all of history since mechanized warfare have caused such extreme carnage to combatants and civilians. As I previously said, I do think that the battlefield is changing, and I think we will continue to see more drones, robotics. I don't think that that will ever completely replace boots on the ground. But is there any hope that maybe warfare in the future might not have the same effects?
Well, unless people change, I don't think so. Like you say, it ultimately is going to involve boots on the ground. No wars have ever been won from the air. Boots on the ground win the wars. So, yeah, it'll help. Maybe we can get less carnage, less people damaged or killed, but that's not going to change. Some of the inspiration for that came from the Iliad. I don't know if you've ever read that, but there's passages in it where they talk. Well, there's passages in it where they talk about the night before the battle, how they're all sitting around a campfire with stark terror in their eyes and how they deal with it. I encourage you to go read that again, because being a Marine veteran with, and you say you're in Afghanistan? Is that what you said?
Yes, we were in Afghanistan. We were involved with the battle for Marja.
Okay, so you understand what I'm saying here. I mean, this is not something
Very
new.
much so.
Gone through the entire history of humans in warfare. It's PTSD all the way back in what was that 1200 BC or something like that. That's the earliest recorded account of it that I've ever seen. And it's actually very well written, you know. Plato was an extremely good writer.
It's interesting to look at that because even just sitting here reflecting on it, we were, as I said, involved for the push for Marja, which if anybody has a slight knowledge of Afghanistan, that was one of the largest pushes throughout Operation Enduring Freedom. And we were building that up. We knew exactly what we were going to do. We were going to enter the city of Marja. And I remember looking around the night before that we pushed in, and people were handling that in different ways. And myself, at 24 years old, I handled it much differently than I would have now. Obviously, as a father of 3 girls, married, whatever the case may be. It is interesting in how people maybe deal with that at the time and then conversely how they deal with it afterwards. That's like I said, I'm just sitting there reflecting on it as you say those things. I think that my point was in as the battlefield continues to change, will we see changes within PTSD? Ultimately, I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think that we will because as you said, the nature of who we are doesn't necessarily change. I know right now you are kind of working with some consulting groups and you are trying to maybe turn this into a screenplay. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. In fact, I had a really good meeting with them today. I'm supposed to meet with their project coordinator tomorrow and set up a roadmap for how to go about this. These are media consultants who actually prepare uh, stories to sell to production studios. They're all professional Hollywood people. So I felt like I needed to go find somebody who actually had some connections there and could help me put together a package that would appeal to studio executives, people that make the decisions on whether they're going to make a film or not. Other than me just blundering at it myself, you know, it could literally take years. And frankly, at my age, I don't know if I'll ever see that come to fruition. Trying to make it happen as quickly as I can.
Again, having talked with you, we've been working on being able to sit down for a couple months now, and we've had technical difficulties, scheduling difficulties, but just in the times that we have talked, I think that the story and the passion and everything that you've got for this project is there. So I wish you all the best. I'm going to be following you, and if there's anything that I can do, we want to make sure that we do that as well. But the book again is called Blood, Tears, and Purple Hearts. And where can people purchase it?
They can pretty much buy it on any platform that sells books. It's on Amazon, various bookstores. It's on Apple Books, Google Books, Barnes and Noble Books. It's not in bookstores yet. You have to buy it online, but I'm trying to get Barnes and Noble to agree to carry it in stores. I don't know. We'll see where that goes.
Can buy physical hardback copies, correct? I know that
Yes, yes, you can.
it's not just an ebook, you can buy it. It's out there. So anybody that is interested, especially that might feel closely about either the combat over the past 20 years or even the traumas of female soldiers, Marines, sailors, I highly encourage you to pick it up. I have worked on reading it and I'm continuing to work through it, and I can tell you that I love the book itself so far. I can't wait to finish it. Brian, I sincerely appreciate the time you took out of your busy day to chat with us. I know that you and I will continue to stay in touch, but I wish you all the best, Brian.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate you having me on as a guest. Hope you all enjoy listening to this.
Absolutely. We appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon. All right, guys, that is going to wrap up our conversation with Brian Ricketts. Huge shout out to Brian for sharing his insight and perspective. Show him some love and go pick up his book, Blood, Tears, and Purple Hearts, wherever books are sold. If something struck you significantly from this episode, do us a favor, like, subscribe, and share it with someone that needs to hear it. We absolutely love hearing from other veterans within the community. New episodes are going to drop every Friday, and be on the lookout for some new segments coming y'all's way soon. Until then, pop smoke and then pop off.